The sun is fading over Falcon Heights, Minnesota, casting long shadows across suburban streets where families walk dogs, children play, and life seems ordinary, safe even. But for some, safety is an illusion. Philando Castile was a man who lived in those shadows, a man who believed in everyday dignity, in rules followed and responsibilities honored. He was a driver, a boyfriend, a cafeteria supervisor, a father. A man who smiled, who joked, who carefully obeyed the law because he knew that even obedience would not always protect him. That evening in July 2016, Philando was behind the wheel with his girlfriend, Diamond Reynolds, and her young daughter in the back seat. He had been pulled over before, for reasons vague and undefined. His presence on these streets enough to draw attention from those sworn to enforce the law. Each stop left its mark. A tightening in the chest, a polite nod, an anxious hand brushing against the seatbelt. But Philando moved forward, hoping the next encounter would be ordinary, harmless, routine. He was wrong. The red and blue lights flashed behind him. Diamond noticed first. Philando's hands instinctively went to the wheel. His calm, measured voice spoke to the officer through the rolled-down window, explaining his compliance, the license and registration ready, the vehicle documentation on hand. There was no bravado, no defiance. Just ordinary conversation. A man attempting to preserve life with words and evidence of lawfulness. But authority does not always listen. It observes, judges, and acts with its own internal logic. The officer approached, his badge glinting in the late sunlight. His demeanor precise, trained, confident. A handshake with a stranger in the street could not have prepared Philando for what was about to unfold. Questions were asked, instructions given. Philando obeyed. He moved slowly, explaining each movement. And yet, the power dynamic was already unbalanced. Every gesture of compliance, every careful word, was viewed through the lens of suspicion. Dramatic irony saturates the scene. The audience knows, Philando knows, and yet the officer acts as if the worst is inevitable. The order came, reach for your license. Philando's hand moved to retrieve it, slowly, clearly, explaining what he was doing. In the blink of an eye, the encounter turned violent. Shots rang out. The car, once a symbol of routine life, became a cage of chaos. Philando slumped, bleeding, unable to speak, unable to reason with the authority that had judged him without cause. Diamond screamed, her child crying in the back seat. Cameras capturing the horror as it unfolded. The underdog, underestimated, obeying every law, had no shield against the unchecked power across from him. Emergency responders arrived, sirens blaring against the quiet suburb, but the damage was done. Philando Castile was pronounced dead. His life, truncated, echoed in every corner of Falcon Heights and beyond. The nation watched, stunned, as video footage from Diamond Reynolds' phone was shared online. The horrific immediacy of the moment. A calm man, shot in his own car while obeying police commands, forced viewers to confront the raw reality of systemic failure. Justice, when filtered through bureaucracy, often feels distant. Here it felt impossible. Yet the story does not end with Philando's death. From the grief and outrage, the power began to shift. Citizens demanded accountability. Protests erupted, not just in Minnesota but across the country. The officer involved was charged. The courtroom became a theater where morality, legality, and power collided. Philando Castile, the man underestimated by authority in life, became a symbol of resistance in death. Dramatic irony lingered. The officer had assumed control over life and compliance, but in the public eye, the narrative had flipped. Philando's humanity, meticulously documented by those he loved, became undeniable. The underdog's story forced reflection, legislation, and awareness that the powerful could not erase. Yet even in accountability, there is imperfection. The trial ended in acquittal. The verdict struck a blow to those who had believed in justice administered by law. But this is where true crime teaches its most painful lesson. Justice is not always delivered in courtrooms. Sometimes it is measured in memory, in legislation, in cultural consciousness. Philando's death sparked conversations about racial profiling, gun ownership, and the relationship between citizens and law enforcement that continue to this day. His legacy challenged authority to confront itself, forced systems to acknowledge failures they had hoped would remain invisible. The lesson crystallizes in the tension between compliance and safety, obedience and vulnerability. Philando Castile followed the law. He moved carefully, explained his intentions, tried to preserve life with words and gestures, and yet his life was taken. Dramatic irony lies in this ultimate truth. Sometimes doing everything right is not enough. The underdog does not always survive, but their story can endure, alter perceptions, and inspire change. Power, once assumed to be absolute, is revealed as fragile when faced with collective scrutiny. Ordinary citizens, armed with phones and voices, hold a mirror to authority that can no longer be ignored. As the camera lingers on Diamond Reynolds' face, tear-streaked yet resolute, the story closes one chapter but opens another. Philando's name lives in every policy debate, every discussion of systemic reform, every demand for justice that refuses to die quietly. His story is a reminder that the underdog can force accountability, that awareness is the first step toward reform, and that humanity cannot be legislated, only respected. And yet, the cliffhanger remains, because the narrative does not stop with Philando. His death sparked national outrage, but countless others continue to face the same threats, the same vague stops, the same deadly consequences. The system's fragility, the imbalance of power, and the recurring underestimation of ordinary lives remain unresolved. The camera pans outward from Falcon Heights, capturing streets where countless traffic stops continue, where ordinary citizens navigate authority that may or may not respect them, and where the question lingers: will the next encounter end in compliance, tragedy, or survival? Part 2 will explore the systemic shifts triggered by Philando's death, the legislation, public awareness campaigns, and the untold stories of those who, like him, remain underestimated. The story continues, and the question is more urgent than ever. How many lives must be tested before justice is truly served? Philando Castile's life was cut short, but his story refuses to end. And for those watching closely, it's not just history. It's a warning, a lesson, and a call to remember that change only comes when ordinary people refuse to look away. The streets of Falcon Heights were quiet again, but the echoes of that July night in 2016 had not faded. Philando Castile's death was no longer a local tragedy. It had become a national reckoning. Across the country, people watched the video over and over, replaying each moment, each flash of light, each terrified word. Dramatic irony cut deeper than ever. A man who had followed the law, who had complied with every instruction, was dead, and the law had offered no protection. And yet, in that injustice, a movement was born. Community leaders, activists, and ordinary citizens demanded more than apologies. They demanded systemic change. Town hall meetings filled to capacity. Social media erupted with outrage, petitions went viral, and hashtags like #PhilandoCastile and #Black Lives Matter trended relentlessly. Every post, every shared clip, every protest became a mirror reflecting the power imbalance that had cost Philando his life. The underdog, underestimated in life, had become a symbol of accountability in death. Legislators began to listen, though slowly, reluctantly, and inconsistently. Proposals were made to revise officer training, to require better de-escalation techniques, to mandate mental health and implicit bias education. For the first time, compliance and courtesy were not enough. Authority itself was under scrutiny. Dramatic irony thrummed in these developments. The same system that had failed Philando now tried to save face by claiming progress, all while the families of victims and activists reminded them of the stakes. Diamond Reynolds, Philando's girlfriend, became a public voice of resilience. Her videos, shared immediately after the shooting, showed not only grief but courage and clarity. She spoke directly to a nation that had become complicit in silence for too long. The camera did not lie. A woman, tear-streaked but unbroken, holding a child in her arms, demanding accountability. In life, Philando had been underestimated. In death, his humanity and dignity could not be ignored. His story challenged authority, forcing officials and civilians alike to question what compliance, obedience, and fairness really meant. But power is patient, bureaucracy is slow. Even in the wake of national outrage, meaningful reform encountered resistance. Departments resisted accountability measures. Officers questioned new procedures. Politicians offered statements without action. The dramatic irony deepened. The system publicly claimed progress while quietly preserving the structures that had failed Philando. Ordinary citizens had become the watchdogs, the persistent eyes holding authority accountable. And yet, the tension remained. Would their vigilance be enough? Across Minnesota and beyond, Philando Castile's name became a reference point. Training materials, university lectures, and law enforcement discussions began citing his story, not as tragedy alone, but as a case study in systemic failure. His death sparked the Philando Castile law, designed to regulate traffic stops and improve public safety. And still, the law could not undo the harm. Dramatic irony struck again. Legislative reforms carried Philando's name, but they could not bring him back. Justice, when filtered through the machinery of power, was partial, slow, and incomplete. The underdog had forced a shift in narrative. The public, once silent, now spoke loudly and consistently. Videos were analyzed frame by frame. Witness accounts were cross-referenced. Community members trained to document encounters with police. Phones and cameras became shields of accountability. Philando Castile, whose compliance had not saved him, had indirectly armed countless others with knowledge and awareness. His story forced the nation to reckon with the uncomfortable truth. Safety is not guaranteed, and the powerful cannot always be trusted to wield authority justly. Yet the cliffhanger persists. For every reform passed, for every new policy proposed, streets still exist where ordinary citizens can be stopped without reason. Officers still make split-second decisions with lives in their hands. Compliance, respect, and carefulness are no guarantee. The narrative remains unresolved, suspended in a tension between vigilance and vulnerability. Dramatic irony saturates the present. The same systems that claim to protect now face scrutiny from the very people they were designed to govern. And this scrutiny is relentless, inconvenient, and necessary. As the narration slows, the camera pans across a suburban street in Minnesota. The sun sets low, painting long shadows across parked cars. Children ride bikes. Drivers check their mirrors. Police cruiser idles in the distance. Every stop, every glance, every word spoken could become history or tragedy. The question looms: when the next encounter happens, will authority wield power responsibly, or will another ordinary life be caught in the same deadly pattern? Philando Castile's legacy lives in awareness, in legislation, in public demand for accountability. But it also lives in tension, in uncertainty, in the reminder that justice is not a moment. It is a movement. Every citizen who documents, questions, and refuses to remain silent becomes part of that movement. The underdog, silenced by bullets, continues to speak through the voices of those who refuse to forget. The final suspense for Part 3 is clear. The system has been challenged, the public awakened, and reforms debated. But the story is far from over. Every routine traffic stop, every encounter with authority, is a potential flashpoint. And the nation watches, remembering Philando Castile, questioning what ordinary people can do to prevent history from repeating itself. In Part 4, we will explore how Philando Castile's story reshaped public perception, inspired legislation, and fueled ongoing civil rights activism, while examining the unresolved dangers that still persist for ordinary citizens. The story continues, the tension remains, and the question remains: how long before the next life is tested by the same patterns of power? The world moved on, or at least it tried. Headlines faded. Social media feeds shifted. Yet in Falcon Heights, Minnesota, the echoes of July 6, 2016, never disappeared. Philando Castile's name became more than a person. It became a warning, a benchmark, a question written into the conscience of a nation. Dramatic irony lingers here. The man who complied fully with the law could not survive an encounter with authority, Yet his death forced the system to confront itself in ways it had long avoided. Nationally, his story sparked conversations that were uncomfortable but necessary. Activists demanded not only accountability but systemic reform. Discussions of racial profiling, gun rights, and traffic stop procedures dominated panels, talk shows, and classrooms. Philando's death had pierced the veil of assumed safety for Black Americans. The underdog, underestimated in life and silenced in death, had become a catalyst for a movement. Legislators acted, though cautiously. The Philando Castile law was introduced to clarify the protocols officers must follow during traffic stops, particularly when firearms are present. Officers were required to verbalize commands more clearly, and individuals were encouraged to comply while being aware of their rights. Policies for de-escalation training were emphasized, as well as racial bias and mental health awareness. Dramatic irony hums beneath each reform. The system that once failed him now claimed to protect future citizens, yet only because public pressure made ignoring injustice impossible. Diamond Reynolds continued her advocacy, sharing her experience not only with grief but with relentless determination. Her voice reminded the nation that accountability is not automatic. It must be demanded. The couple's young daughter grew up seeing how ordinary citizens could confront extraordinary power, how a single voice, amplified through media and community, could reshape a nation's attention. Philando's humanity could no longer be denied. Yet systemic change is never complete. Policies exist on paper, but implementation falters. Officers remain human, institutions remain bureaucratic, and ordinary citizens remain at risk. The dramatic irony is unavoidable. Compliance, civility, and law-abiding behavior still cannot guarantee safety. The lessons of Philando Castile echo loudly, but the threats he faced persist, waiting for the next encounter to reveal the fragility of life and authority. Across the country, Philando's story inspired others to act. Community programs trained civilians in documenting police encounters. School curricula included lessons on civil rights, racial inequality, and the importance of advocacy. Social media became both a shield and a platform for truth, allowing individuals to record injustices before they could be erased. The underdog's influence, once underestimated, had grown into a collective force challenging the very structures that had failed him. But resistance remained. Departments resisted new protocols, claiming tradition or necessity. Politicians softened language, offered statements, then moved on to other priorities. The public's attention wavered. And here lies the stark truth. Without constant vigilance, even the most painful lessons risk being forgotten. Dramatic irony thrives in this space. The system appears to have learned, but the underlying dangers persist, often invisible until another tragedy occurs. Yet Philando Castile's story also teaches a profound life lesson. The fight for justice does not rely solely on courts, laws, or officials. It relies on ordinary people refusing to look away. Awareness, advocacy, and accountability are the tools that shift power. Compliance alone is not protection. Silence is not safety. The underdog may fall, but their story, their memory, and their impact can shape generations. Justice is imperfect, but vigilance makes it possible. As the narration slows, the camera pans over Falcon Heights once again. Streets glow in evening light. Cars pass silently. Police vehicles patrol. Each interaction carries the weight of possibility. Each driver, each officer, faces the same split-second choices that shaped Philando's final moments. And the audience is left with a question that chills. Will the system now truly protect life? Or will another ordinary citizen face the same deadly imbalance of power? The cliffhanger remains. Reforms exist, lessons are taught, and public awareness grows. But the tension persists. Every stop, every encounter, every human decision is a potential pivot between safety and tragedy. The story of Philando Castile is not only about one man, one night, or one officer. It is about the fragile line between compliance and vulnerability, obedience and justice, authority and accountability. The streets of Falcon Heights were quieter now than that fatal night, Yet the echoes of Philando Castile's life and death lingered in every corner. His name had become synonymous with injustice, compliance, and the fragility of life under unchecked authority. Dramatic irony runs like a current through the story. A man who obeyed the law, who followed every instruction, had no guarantee of safety. Yet his death sparked a national movement that continues to test the very system that failed him. Across the country, citizens began to question the ordinary, everyday interactions that too often turned fatal. Traffic stops, once assumed to be mundane, became moments fraught with tension. Parents instructed children not just on courtesy, but on caution. Individuals practiced verbalizing movements during stops, recording every encounter, and understanding their rights. Philando Castile's story transformed ordinary vigilance into a necessary skill for survival. Activism surged. Social media, once a platform for sharing trivialities, became a powerful tool for accountability. Citizens documented police encounters, highlighted patterns of discrimination, and refused to let authority operate unchecked. Protests continued, not only in Minnesota but nationwide in cities big and small. Philando's name became a rallying cry for justice and reform. His legacy was no longer private. It had become public, persistent, and impossible to ignore. Legislative attempts, while imperfect, began to take shape. Policies regarding traffic stops, officer training, and racial bias awareness were introduced and, in some cases, implemented. The Philando Castile law served as a blueprint for these reforms, clarifying how officers should approach encounters involving firearms and civilians. Training in de-escalation, bias recognition, and communication became mandatory in some districts. Dramatic irony persists. The very system that failed him now cited his death as a reason for reform, yet compliance alone could not have saved his life. Authority had been challenged not by force, but by visibility, memory, and public pressure. Diamond Reynolds' advocacy remained a central force. Her courage in the aftermath, speaking openly, recording her perspective, and demanding accountability, reminded the nation that truth cannot be silenced. Her presence forced authority to reckon not only with the facts of that night, but with the consequences of negligence and bias. She transformed personal grief into public vigilance, a living embodiment of resistance. Yet the struggle continued. Despite new laws and awareness campaigns, every day presented the same uncertainties. Ordinary citizens, often unaware of local nuances, still faced officers with discretion over life and death. Compliance, politeness, and documentation were tools, but no guarantees. Dramatic irony deepens here. The underdog had fallen, yet his story illuminated the very vulnerabilities the system had hoped to obscure. The broader conversation had changed. Philando's story became central in discussions about police reform, racial profiling, and the need for community oversight. Universities studied it. Documentaries chronicled it. Lawmakers cited it. Yet systemic inertia and resistance to change reminded everyone that reforms are only effective if enforced, monitored, and defended. Ordinary citizens must remain vigilant. Progress is fragile, and power is persistent. The lesson crystallizes. Justice is not automatic. It does not reside solely in courts, laws, or institutional statements. Justice is cultivated, demanded, and defended through collective action, awareness, and accountability. Philando Castile's story demonstrates the imbalance between compliance and safety, obedience and vulnerability, authority and humanity. The underdog may fall, but his story can alter the landscape, challenging entrenched power structures and demanding change that extends far beyond one individual. As the narration slows, the camera pans over Minnesota streets bathed in late afternoon light. Cars move cautiously, families pass by sidewalks, officers patrol. Every moment carries potential, an encounter that could be ordinary, or one that could escalate. The audience is left with a chilling reminder. The system has shifted, awareness has grown, but vigilance is required to ensure that ordinary citizens are not subjected to the same fate. The cliffhanger remains, unresolved yet pressing. Reforms have been introduced, awareness has increased, but the tension persists. Every traffic stop, every interaction with authority, remains a potential flashpoint. Philando Castile's legacy is not merely in the reforms named after him, but in the reminder that ordinary people must continue to observe, document, and demand accountability. The next chapter, Part 6, will examine how these reforms are tested in real life, the ongoing activism inspired by his death, and the difficult question: are we doing enough to prevent another tragedy like Philando Castile's? Philando Castile's life and death illustrate a painful truth. Compliance and good intentions do not guarantee survival in a system where unchecked authority operates. But his story also offers hope. Through awareness, advocacy, and action, ordinary citizens can challenge power, illuminate injustice, and push for accountability that can save lives. The underdog may fall, but their story can inspire a movement, and that movement continues to shape the nation.